Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to Fable Fridays, the day of the week where I sit down and tell you an old story. But don't get it twisted. These are not your mama's stories. A lot of these are dark and they may contain adult content. The one today definitely contains adult content. For self-care today, I am drinking a Truly mango lemonade. Oh yeah, call me basic. It's fine. It won't hurt my feelings. Crack this open, pour it in my cup. Ooh. I need this right now. Cheers. Unlike the stories I told in the last two videos, this story is one that I'm gonna go ahead and say all of you guys know. Disney has made this story famous. You might even know bits and pieces of some of the older versions, but this is one of the oldest stories. The first known version of this goes all the way back to the 1300s. It was called Persephorus. That version greatly inspired the first published famous version of this story by an Italian poet named Basile. Sadly, he passed away before he could publish it, but his sister went ahead and published it after he died, so that is how we get to hear the story today. He called this story Sun, Moon, and Talia, but the version you guys probably know is called Sleeping Beauty. Basile's version was taken and altered and republished by Charles Perrault, who also did Bluebeard, which we did in a Fable Friday, and he named his version of the story The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. So that is where you're starting to see the name of the version that we all know today. And in the 1800s, the Brothers Grimm came and they altered it again and they republished it and named it Little Briar Rose. So today I'm going to tell you the version called Sun, Moon, and Talia. And after I tell you that version, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the other two famous versions so that you can see the progression of how this story that I'm going to tell you ended up being the Disney version. Before I get started on this story, I would love it if you would take a moment and subscribe to this channel. I would love to have you. I make tons of different videos. Most of my videos right now are on my fitness journey, my infertility journey, and decorating and organizing my house, as well as this story series. Last time we talked about a story where a wife dies, and then when she comes back, she might be a demon. I don't know. It's really creepy. Definitely check it out if you haven't watched that one already. I will link the little storytime playlist below. All right, let's get into the story. Sun, Moon, and Talia. So once upon a time, there was a great and powerful lord. In this version, it's not a king, she's not a princess, it's just a powerful house, and she is a very loved and wished for daughter. He names her Talia, and it's sad because in this version of the story, the mom is not in the story at all. I don't know if she died during childbirth or if she's just not an important character, so she's not in there. But for whatever reason, this father feels very protective over his daughter, and he wants to make sure that her future is secure and safe. Again, leading me to believe that maybe something happened to the mother. So he sends out for all of the most powerful astrologers and fortune tellers and seers in his land to come and read the future of his little daughter so that he can make sure that her future is going to be perfect. All of these fortune tellers, they met in the room and they discussed amongst them, and they finally came to the conclusion that she was in great mortal danger of a splinter of flax at some point in her future. And her father is horrified. He immediately bans anything similar to flax, all hemp, nothing with a spindle or a spinning wheel. He permanently banned all of these items, burned them all, they were gone. And he knew that he had protected his little daughter from her fate. Rule number one in these stories, you are never protected from your fate. Many years pass by and Talia has grown into a beautiful young woman. She's the perfect daughter. She's smart, she's kind, and like I said, she's incredibly beautiful. And one day she's in her room and she's looking out the window and she sees an old lady sitting in front of a spindle. And she's never seen one before. She's immediately extremely curious and she calls out to the woman and says, "What is that? Can I help?" And here's the first problem. The father never explained to her that she had this fate, that she was in great mortal danger of a splinter of flax. Had he told her that, she probably would have stayed away from flax. Flax isn't that exciting. If he said you're in danger of true love's kiss, well, she probably would have tested the limits and still wanted a true love's kiss, but she probably wouldn't have wanted to mess with flax. you know, the old lady agrees to show her how to stretch the flax, and she sits down and she starts messing with the flax, and immediately a splinter gets stuck underneath her fingernail, which, ow, and she falls down dead. The old lady was so horrified that it says in the story that she ran down the stairs and is running still. I just think that's so funny. Like, it's been 500 years and this lady's still running away. But in this version, she did not do this on purpose. She did not have ill intent towards Talia. She was not an evil fairy in disguise. There's no Maleficent in this story. There's no evil fairies. This was just a random curse that for some reason was in the fate of this daughter, and it had nothing to do with like being cursed by a fairy who was mad, which in all the other versions pretty much that is why this curse exists. The curse is not explained. It just exists in this version. So the old lady's running, Talia's dead, and her father is heartbroken. He has never experienced grief like this. He decides to take her and dress her in the most beautiful gown and put her in one of his country homes and had her laid out on a velvet throne under beautiful royal brocade, a tomb fit for royalty, and then closed the house up and abandoned her there. And I think this was his way of giving her the most beautiful resting place. He did not realize that she wasn't fully, permanently, truly dead. The idea that she could wake up from this curse is not something that's part of the story, unlike all of the other versions. He closed up the house and left her there, going back to grieve and mourn, and he wanted to forget that it had ever happened. Several years go by, and one day a young king is out hunting in that part of the country. And this is a king from a neighboring land. So he's like on the land hunting, and his falcon escapes off his arm and flies through the window of a manor home that he's passing. And he's like, oh shoot, there goes my bird. I gotta go get my bird. He calls for his bird, but it doesn't come back. So he has one of his men go and knock on the door. And the man knocks for a very long time and no one answers. And it's around this time that they're realizing that the house might be abandoned. Up until this point, they were pretty sure that it wasn't abandoned. It was still kept up really nicely, and it just didn't look like a home that would have absolutely no one there. Usually the country homes would at least have a set of servants to keep up the house and make it nice so that whenever the person who owned it wanted to come visit, it would be ready for them. In this case, it seemed like nobody was home. So the king decides to take a ladder and climb up into the window that the bird flew through. The king starts walking through the manor and is more and more shocked and confused that nobody is there, because it looks like people were just there. It almost looks like people had been there living their lives and then they just disappeared in the blink of an eye, or they had turned invisible. And he's like, what the heck is going on? But he continues looking through, and he finally comes into the room where Talia is laid out on this velvet throne. And he immediately realizes that she must be enchanted or asleep. He knows she's not dead. He can just tell because she still looks alive. And also she's all by herself in this manner. Like no one is taking care of her. Clearly something weird is going on here. But he tries to wake her up and she does not wake up. So he's like, well, I guess she's enchanted. The longer he stares at her, the more he wants her. And this is where the story takes a drastic turn from the version that we all know. He does not give her a kiss like in the Disney version to wake her up. No, he doesn't. He carries her to the bed and he, quote, gathers the fruits of her love. If you don't know what that means, he took advantage of her while she was unconscious and enchanted. After he literally has his way with her, he leaves her there and goes back to his kingdom. And it is said that he literally doesn't give her another thought for a very long time. Like he forgets all about her. He goes home, he gets busy with work, with life, forgets all about this 15-year-old enchanted girl who he totally took advantage of. Everything from this point forward in the story is completely different than anything you might know from the Disney version. That pretty much is the Disney version already. If you exchange the taking advantage of, put a true love's kiss in, add a couple of good fairies and an evil fairy, you have the basic premise of the Disney movie. But this version has barely gotten started. So 9 months pass and Talia is still unconscious, but she gives birth to twin babies, a boy and a girl, because she conceived while she was being taken advantage of. And she gives birth to these babies. She's still unconscious. And in this scene is the only time the fairies come into this version of the story. Two fairies appear and they take care of the twins for a while. They make sure that the twins survive. They place the babies up at her breast so that they can drink milk. And then they're not really mentioned again. One day, one of the babies is sucking on her fingers and sucks the splinter of flax right out from under her nail, and she immediately wakes up. Talia is completely fine. She wakes up, she's thrilled to see her babies. She decides to name them Sun and Moon because she says to herself that their existence is as mysterious to her as the existence of the sun and the moon, which that makes sense. She has no idea where they came from, but she assumes they're hers because they're with her and they're alone and they're drinking from her breast. I mean, like, they're her babies, but she's like, I have no idea what happened, but it's fine. I'm just gonna live my life here in this manor by myself with my babies. I'm gonna name them Sun and Moon. She wanders around the manor. She realizes she's absolutely alone. There are no servants, but there is food and drink available for her set out on the table. So I don't know if these fairies maybe left enchanted food for her to live off of, but the fairies are gone. She doesn't ever meet them. They never come back into the story. It was just convenient to have magical fairies that could take care of the babies, because how else would the babies have survived? Around this time, the king remembers her and says, what about that cute 15-year-old? I'm gonna go see if she's around still, probably wanting to take advantage of her again. That's probably what he was thinking. So he goes to check on her and he is shocked to find her awake and she has babies and they're his babies. But instead of being like really weird about it or like leaving or lying or like all the things you would think he does, no, he decides that he loves her and he loves those babies. And he tells her everything. He tells her the truth. He's like, look, I had some fun while you were asleep and now those are our kids and I'm a king. She decides that she's not gonna be mad. She loves him too. And it's the father of her babies. So she's like, yeah, I'm gonna be with you. So they hang out for a couple days. They like get to know each other. And then the king says, okay, I gotta leave. I gotta go back to my kingdom. You can't come with me this time, but don't worry. I'll be right back to get you. And then you can come with me then. And you might be thinking, well, why can't she just come with you now? Like, that seems weird to leave her by herself with two babies. He had a wife at home, a queen wife. Yeah, the story gets worse. He has to go home and he has to figure out what to do with his wife. He goes back home and he tells his wife that he had just been delayed on the hunt. He just wanted to stay out a couple extra days. And she's like, okay, that's fine. But unfortunately for him, he starts talking about Talia and Sun and Moon in his sleep. And the queen overhears this and immediately gets suspicious, rightfully so. The wife is mad. She's jealous. She doesn't like this at all. Of course she doesn't. So she sends for the royal secretary and she says, you got to tell me everything. You have to tell me who my husband is in love with, what's been happening. If you do, I will give you all the treasures you want. But if you don't, you'll never be found alive again. Take your pick. I mean, what is he gonna say? He's scared, of course, and so he immediately tells her everything, blurts out the whole story. The queen tells the secretary, go to Talia and in the name of the king, tell her that he requests that she send her children to him, which she had no reason to not trust the royal secretary. She had met him before, but it does seem a little bit weird that she would just send her babies away with someone, and the story's about to get even darker. The queen takes the children to the cook and tells him to cook them into 100 different dishes and feed them to their father, the king. And luckily the cook is like not a bad person and is not about to do this. So the cook secretly takes the children to his wife and says, hide these children and take care of them. And he ended up killing a couple of lambs and cooking them into the meals. So he serves over 100 meals to the king and the queen that night. And the king is just eating it up. I mean, he's loving it. And the queen, who thinks that he's eating dishes with his own cooked children inside of it, keeps encouraging him to eat more. She keeps saying, eat, eat, you are eating of your own. And she says this a couple of times. The first couple of times she says it, it kind of annoys the king, but he ignores it. But then finally he gets really annoyed with her and he goes, I know perfectly well I'm eating of my own since you have brought nothing into this house. Which that is so rude. I mean, she's an evil woman, don't get me wrong. But like, he went off and took advantage of a 15-year-old and got her pregnant and is like in love with her and, You know, I mean, she has the right to be mad. I'm not taking her side. She's obviously in the wrong. You don't eat children. But that was just a low blow. Like, she's the queen. What is she supposed to bring into the house, you know? The queen was not done with the king's punishment yet. She sends the secretary back to Talia and tells him to tell Talia that the king longed for her presence and to come to the castle. And Talia's thrilled. You know, she like misses her babies. She misses her baby daddy. She's just like ready to go to the castle and like get this party started. But when she gets there, it's not the king who's waiting for her. It's the queen, and her face glowed with the evil within. And the queen says to Talia, quote, "Welcome, Madam Busybody." And honestly, I wonder if something got lost in translation there, because Madam Busybody is like such a lame insult. Okay. "You are a fine piece of goods, you ill weed. You are enjoying my husband. So you are a lump of filth, the cruel witch that has caused my head to spin? Change your ways, for you are welcome to purgatory, where I will compensate you for all the evil you've done to me." Hopefully I got that right. I mean, it was pretty similar to that. Basically, she's saying, get ready for hell, because I'm about to send you there. Talia immediately starts to try to explain herself. She tries to tell the queen that the king had taken advantage of her while she was unconscious and that she was not a willing party of this, but the queen did not care. She said, "Light the fire." And there was this giant fire that was lit in the middle of the courtyard of the palace. And I mean, she literally was going to burn Talia. She wasn't even listening to Talia. Talia realizes this is going very badly, and she starts begging for her life, but realizes that this queen was not going to listen to her. So instead, she decided to start begging to remove her clothes, which, to be honest, is such a strange request, but okay. And the queen didn't feel bad for her and didn't want to make her more comfortable by letting her remove her clothes. But Talia was wearing really beautiful clothing, and so the queen was like, yeah, you can strip naked and I'll keep your clothes, basically. So this scene is so weird. Talia starts removing items of clothing, and with each item that she removed, she would scream louder and louder with each piece. So she would like take off her corset and scream, and then take off her skirt and scream even louder. And like with each layer, she would scream louder and louder, which was probably really confusing. But actually, I think what she was doing is she was trying to get someone's attention, and it worked, because the king came storming into the yard and he's like, "What the heck is happening?" As he should. The king demands to know what is happening. And also, when he sees Talia, he's like, "Where are the children?" The queen did not back down. She was like, "I know you cheated on me. I fed you your children. You ate them." And I mean, he was obviously horrified and heartbroken, and he fell down to the ground and he said, "Alas, I am the wolf of the sheep," or something like that. "Alas, then I am myself the wolf of my sweet lambs." I think it was something more like that. "Alas, why did these veins not know the fountains of their own blood? What evil deed is this that thou hast done? Begone!" It's very dramatic. The king commanded that the queen and his royal secretary be thrown into the fire. I don't know how he knew the secretary was involved, but he did. And he also condemned the cook to be cooked to death. But right before the cook could be thrown in the fire, he fell to his knees before the king and he said, "I agree that the punishment fits the crime, but I actually didn't cook your children. I hid them away with my wife. They're fine. They're safe." The king had never been happier, and he said, "If you can prove this and bring me my children, I will give you all the riches in the world." And so the cook called to his wife to bring forth the children, and Sun and Moon were there, and they were unharmed, and they went and hugged their dad, and everyone was safe and happy. The king promoted the cook to head of the castle, married Talia, and loved his children until the end of his days. And they all lived happily ever after, except the queen and the royal secretary. There's a proverb at the end of this story, and it goes, "Those who fortune favors find luck even in their sleep." And I actually found 2 other versions in other stories that rhyme a little bit better, so I feel like they're a little bit more fun. I'm gonna read these 2. So the first one is, "He who has luck may go to bed and bliss will reign upon his head." And the other one is, "Lucky people, so 'tis said, are blessed by fortune whilst in bed." So basically it's saying that she, although she had this curse, she was blessed to have a great and happy life, and so she found good luck even in her sleep by the king coming and taking advantage of her and having babies with her, and then now she's the new queen because the other queen got killed. So not exactly a happy story. I mean, this story is just wild from start to finish. And I wouldn't even say that this is necessarily the most wild version. I think it's the darkest version. This version is the only version that includes a scene that's more than just true love's kiss, the scene where he takes advantage of her. Now that is also seen in the original version that this is all based off, called Persephorist, I think it was called, from the 1300s. And in that story, the same thing happens. The prince impregnates the girl and she has her babies and they fall in love and live happily ever after. Even the bit about the child sucking out the splinter of flax and therefore waking her is from that 1300s version. So Basile came in and basically took that story and expanded it and made it more of a story, added a lot of details. And then Charles Perrault came and he said, okay, we're gonna change this up. We're gonna take out the taking advantage of scene and we're gonna add a lot of the elements that we now see in today's version. So he actually has the fairies at the beginning of the story that are bestowing gifts upon the princess. There are 7 fairies in his story instead of the 3 that are in the Disney version. And they all give her different gifts of, beauty and grace and the ability to sing. But there's one fairy who was forgotten about and she gets mad and she's the one that puts the curse on the princess. It says in the story that the fairy that was left out wasn't left out because she was like an evil fairy. She was left out because they thought she was dead because she hadn't been seen in over 50 years. So she shows up, she's mad as a hornet, and she comes in and she's like, this girl gonna die on her 16th birthday. But then the last fairy hadn't given her gift yet, just like in the Disney movie. So she's like, I can't entirely remove this curse, but I can make it to where she just falls asleep for 100 years and doesn't die. And so that's what happens. When she turns 16, she pricks her finger, she goes into an enchanted sleep, just like the story we know, and 100 years goes by. The last fairy, the one that changed the curse so that she wouldn't die, shows up when she pricks her finger and puts the entire castle into an enchanted sleep. Just like we see in the Disney version, it is said that even the horses in the stables and the little dog on the princess's bed falls asleep. And this part is so weird, like what a strange detail, but it said that when she pricked her finger, the good fairy was actually 12,000 leagues away. But don't worry, because she was informed of the news of the princess pricking her finger and falling into this enchanted sleep by a little dwarf who happened to have special shoes that could walk 7,000 leagues in one step. So she actually got there really fast due to this little dwarf. Actually, I don't think it was 7,000 leagues in a step. I think it was 7 leagues in a step, which would still be quite a few steps to get there for 12,000 leagues. But anyway, she gets there hella fast. She puts everyone to sleep because she's like, when this girl wakes up, she's gonna be all by herself and everyone will have gotten old and died, and that is just sad. So we're gonna fix this and we're gonna have everyone, even the little dog, fall asleep, which is, that's sweet of her to have thought of that, 100 years goes by and this young king is passing by the castle and he's with a bunch of his men and he's like, I'm curious about that castle. I heard it's haunted. And some of the other men are like, oh yeah, it's haunted. And one of the men is like, no, an ogre lives there. And then this other man is like, listen, my dad told me that his dad told him that a long time ago, a princess was enchanted in that castle and she'll wake up in 100 years and she's beautiful. And she's 15. And they're like, yeah, let's go in there and find her. The king decides to go and explore this castle. And it's said that brambles and thorns have grown up around the castle. So that is, again, very similar to the Disney version. And he goes inside and he sees all these people who have been standing there in their spots asleep for 100 years. And he's like, this is weird. But then he finds the princess. And right when he sits down with her, she wakes up from her 100 years. And they look at each other and they decide that they're in love. There's not even a true love's kiss or anything. They are just in love, okay? They're 15 and they're in love. The princess and the king, they talk for 4 hours, exactly 4 hours, and they decide that they really are in love. They are gonna be together. And meanwhile, everyone else in the castle has been waking up and they discover that they are starving to death. We don't know why the princess wasn't hungry, but it says it's because she was experiencing true love and so she wasn't feeling hunger. But everyone else felt like they hadn't eaten in 100 years. because they hadn't eaten in 100 years. And so a servant comes into the room and tells the princess and the king that dinner is served right then, or else everyone's going to die. And the king helps the princess stand up for the first time in 100 years, and he takes care not to tell her that she is dressed like his great-grandmother. Not very stylish. It's been 100 years. That little detail tickles me. Like the writer literally put in, and she was dressed like his great-grandma. You know, I just thought that was funny. They end up getting married that very night. There is no time to waste. I am 115 years old, so they got married right then. The next morning, the prince leaves to go back to his own kingdom, and he does not take Sleeping Beauty with him. He decides that he needs to hide this from his mom and dad because they would not approve, so he does not tell them that he's married. For 2 years, they hang out secretly, and they end up having 2 children together who they name Morning and Day. Morning is a girl and Day is a boy, and in the story it says that Day is much more beautiful than Morning, which is just rude. The prince's father, the king, doesn't question where he's going on his hunting trips, but his mom is super suspicious. Like, she knows something is going on. And you might be thinking, well, why doesn't he just tell his parents that he's married? Well, it's because his mom is an ogre, and his mom likes to eat children. And so he doesn't want to tell her he has children because he doesn't want his children to get ate. The mom's part ogre. She's not like a full-fledged green ogre, but she's part ogre, and she definitely enjoys eating children. And so this part of the story kind of brings in the second half of the first version I told you with Talia, because you do have this element of people wanting to eat children and cook them into dishes, which is just such a strange story element. But we see that a lot with these dark stories. Like, were people eating their children back then? Or was that like a huge fear that people were gonna steal your children and eat them? So in this version, you have the mother who's trying to kill the children, and then in the first version, it was the wife. So it is better that Charles Perrault changed it and made it where he doesn't already have a wife. You know, he has just like an annoying mom, but the same elements happen in this version of the story. You have the ogre mom trying to cook and eat the children one by one, and the cook ends up hiding the children, and then she tries to cook and eat the princess herself. The cook has no problem replacing the little boy and the little girl with a lamb and a goat, but it does say that he has a lot of trouble deciding what to replace the princess herself with, because at 115 years old, like, she's really firm. And we don't have any animals that would like pass for her. She old, which is just mean. The ending of the story is pretty similar. You end up with the ogre queen dying, and the princess and the 2 children end up totally fine, and they live happily ever after. So the ending of that one's a little bit better because you don't have like a former wife dying. Like, that just feels really like tricky. You have the adultery theme in there, whereas this one's just like a crazy mom who's part ogre. Like, she's literally part monster. It's a little bit easier to like not feel as bad for her. And then the third version by the Brothers Grimm is very similar to Charles Perrault's version. Instead of 7 fairies, he has 12 fairies, because the more the merrier, you know? And then Disney took that and was like, we're gonna tone this down. We're gonna do 3 fairies. That's enough fairies. The Brothers Grimm version also has the part of the Disney movie where Aurora is actually like walking through the castle, and goes up like an old tower, and that is where the cursed spinning wheel spindle is, and where she pricks her finger. So you can definitely see where the Disney movie took elements from all of these different versions and made it into something that is enjoyable to watch and is a story that we all know. But their version completely removes the second half of the story, where you have the children and people trying to eat the children. So it ends at the prince waking her up with a kiss, which is what we know today. So that is Sleeping Beauty and all of its versions. Obviously, there's probably so many other versions. These stories are so old, and they've been translated so many times that the more you research them, the more stories and versions you're going to find. And so I have done my best in the time that I've had to make this video as informative on this story and where the different elements come from, without being like a professional fairy tale historian. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I do love making these videos for you. The research on this one took a little bit longer than the other 2 because I did go through so many different versions. And I wanted to make sure that I had the story straight. Even though I know the story, the differences in the versions, like, it just was a little bit trickier to keep it straight. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know what you think. If you have story requests, you can leave them below in a comment. I hope you are enjoying this series. It's not going to be every week. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely subscribe if you want to, and I will see you guys with my next one. Goodbye.